Hey there, Alex Kidman here. About to set off on another EV road trip. Well, actually I'm setting off tomorrow, but I'm recording this first to kind of explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So I'm not sitting in my regular car for a start. Most of the time when I do these long road trips, it's with a Tesla Model 3. This is a Polestar 2, so have I changed camps? Not entirely, but I needed to be in a non-Tesla for this particular trip. And before I get into why that is, I should point out where I've got this particular car from. So it's Polestar 2, but I have not got it, as you might think, from Polestar, but instead from Hertz/Thrifty, the car hire mob, because they hire out EVs as part of their car fleet here in Australia. They wanted the promotion and were willing to provide me with the vehicle for the week. Now, I should also point out, this is not a review of EV car hiring in Australia. I mean, honestly, all I've done is gone and pick up a car. And I imagine, in fact, that it's probably no real difference between that and hiring any other kind of vehicle because the process seems to be much the same. However, I also haven't had to pay the fees associated with it. They've provided this to me out of their marketing budget. So there's that too. This is not, however, something that they have paid me to do, also to be ethically clear there. Now, with that out of the way, one of the big challenges, one of the things that often comes up with EV driving is range anxiety and charge anxiety, and especially here in Australia where charging infrastructure isn't perhaps what it could be or should be. And so what I wanted to do was take a road trip that I've already done. So this is from here in Sydney up to Iluka, just north of Grafton, which itself is north of Coffs Harbour, up towards Brisbane, not quite kind of Ballina, Byron Bay area, but not far from it for sure, a reasonable distance run. I've done that in my Model 3 before, and I'm very familiar with how the charging setup for that goes because of Tesla's Supercharger network. And the Supercharger network is often held up as the big golden example of how you do charging networks right. And there's a lot that's admirable about it, for sure. But it's also often seen as a big commercial advantage for Tesla. The reason why you buy a Tesla as opposed to buying other things is because the Supercharger network is there. And I wanted to see how true that was because I know from doing it in the Model 3 from here in Sydney, essentially I would do it as a 3-stop trip. That's both for comfort as well as charging. So from here, stopping at Heatherbrae, stopping at Port Macquarie, and then stopping at Coffs. I could probably stretch it if I charged up a bit extra at Port Macquarie. And make it just a 2-stop. But the 3-stop works nicely for me. I can get coffee, I can get food. It's a good swap distance for drivers and stuff like that. I'm all about being safe on the road and having a comfortable trip rather than the fastest possible. Now, that has actually changed since the last time I did that trip. I'll get into that in a little bit. But I was curious about, well, if you couldn't use the Tesla chargers and you wanted to do that same trip, how would that go? And that's why I'm in the Polestar 2. Now, obviously, in that intervening period, Tesla has opened up some chargers, including some on the route. I'm going to try to avoid using those, but not to the extent of, cutting my nose off to spite my face. If things get desperate, yes, I will use those. Obviously, in a non-Tesla vehicle, you do pay a little bit more. But I better get to actually packing so I can do this road trip, and then we'll hit the road. Let's get on this journey. On the road we go, and yes, I have a co-driver who's filming me here. I also like splitting the drive up that way. Now, the Polestar itself will suggest charging stops. It wanted to suggest Taree, but I know from my own experience and from experience of other drivers in EVs, hi Zach, that Taree can be, well, a bit messy. So instead, I opted to get going fairly early and instead make my first stop here at Karuah. Karuah was an interesting one, as you can see, not exactly busy while I'm there. Certainly available for a charge, albeit not a terribly fast charge. And I'd stopped here fairly specifically, not just because I wanted power, but also because I thought, well, I can grab some breakfast while I'm here. But, well, there was a problem with that because actually you couldn't have grabbed much of anything. Why? Well, because the servo itself is being rebuilt and there really wasn't that much open. Amusing note, of course, I could get EV power here. If you were in an ICE vehicle, you would not have been able to get fuel. Still, the lack of fuel and the slightly slower than expected charging meant that I didn't actually stay here for long, just 11 minutes worth of charging. Back on the road again, and well, I've got to say, the Pacific Highway, it's not the most exciting road. There's a lot of, well, this that you're seeing. But I decided to let the car pick the next destination, as Karuah had not worked out so well for me for food, and it declared that we were going to stop in Thrumster. And I'll be honest here and say I was not 100% sure where Thrumster was, but that's because it's essentially the suburb name for the outskirts of Port Macquarie, a service centre that I've long called the Donut, and I'm pretty sure most of the locals do too. Now, Thrumster also has some newer Tesla chargers, as does Taree, in fact, and they're both open to other vehicles. But again, I was trying to avoid using those. Nice that they're there, though. And here we are at Thrumster. And spoiler, that middle charging slot you can see there did not stay empty for long. This was actually a fairly busy site, and one that I was at for a little while, although because it's at a services centre, it also meant that I could stop and actually have a fairly leisurely brunch. I didn't really feel the impact of the slower charging time here, but this was definitively busier and a little bit tighter to get into as well. Back on the road again, and me back in the driver's seat. And a decision to be made, because here the car wanted us to stop at charge at Coffs Harbour, but I'm actually aware that outside of the big set of Tesla chargers at Park Beach Plaza in Coffs, there's only a handful of available chargers, and their reputation is not strong for reliability. So I decided instead to do another slight diversion for my third charge of the day at Maxville. Why Maxville? Well, if I'm honest, it's because there used to be a really nice bakery in Maxville before the town got bypassed. Unfortunately, that one's no longer there. But these chargers are, and they're EV chargers at an Ampol site. I did worry that I might have to grab the Ampol app, which I actually didn't have on my phone due to a slight lack of preparation on that front. But in fact, this will work with the EV app or the EV RFID card. Grabbing an RFID card, by the way, if you're not aware, is a great way to simplify your charging process for these long road trips. But it was nice and quiet, and it got enough charge to get me all the way to Iluka, which was a big plus. So I got to Iluka with plenty of power, and in fact then spent a week there with the Polestar 2 sitting on a solar-powered granny charger. Slow charging, sure, but nice and environmentally friendly and hugely affordable. That was all quite good. And then it was time to turn around and have a slightly different trip back. And now for the return journey, although obviously at the moment I'm not driving because I'm filming. But let's see what the charger's like on the way back. We may use the same mix, we may not. We'll kind of take it till we find it. First stop was not actually a charging stop. We stopped in Yamba to do parkrun because, well, as I said, the Pacific Highway is kind of boring to drive, guys, and taking breaks and actually taking in the places around you, I think, is a really important part of these kinds of road trips. Did add a little bit of time, but I think it was well worth it. First actual charging stop, Maxville, but both charger sites were busy, despite PlugShare saying they weren't. Grr. There was a Polestar that you can see in the distance there, and a Seal. The Seal owner actually wanted to charge to 100% to try and get back to Sydney without having to charge again. I'm not sure that was going to work all that well for him. And a quick tip if you're not aware, by the way, charging above 80% is much, much, much slower than the 80% before it. So often it's a lot more time efficient to actually charge only to 80%, or only to what you need to get to the next charger. A two-stop for him might have been more efficient, but he was there first, so it's first come, first served, and we just had to wait about 10 minutes for him to finish. I did, however, think that the idea of minimising the number of stops on the way back might be interesting to try, so we charged for a bit longer than we had planned to, with the idea in mind that we would not stop at Thrumster/Port Macquarie at all. We would just try and make our way straight through to Karuah. The car got to a point where it said, yep, you can do that, but you'll only have about 12%. When you get to Karuah, that felt safe enough, bearing in mind that at Karuah we could have probably made it on through to Heatherbrae where there are BP chargers, or in an emergency use the Raymond Terrace Tesla chargers. Back on the road again. Maxville to Karuah is not a shortish drive, but it's a doable one, and the day was fine. And cruise control actually helped us a heck of a lot here, because the car, when we were leaving Maxville, reckoned we'd get to Karuah with about 12%, but thanks to a bit of judicious use of cruise control and some nice enough weather, because when it's really cold, of course, your battery range does suffer a little, we actually got there with a surprising 28%. However, when we got there, we had an interesting time of it. So Karuah was complicated. 2 of the 3 sites were in use, and the BMW in the middle there Well, it was 100% charged and they just wandered away and were not otherwise to be found. Don't do this kind of thing, people. It's just really, really inconsiderate. The bigger problem we hit, though, was we couldn't actually get the third charger to start working. I tried with the RFID card authenticating first. I tried plugging in and then the RFID card. I tried with the app. Nothing was working. And I did consider heading to those Raymond Terrace Tesla ones, but instead I called ChargeFox. And eventually they were actually able to get it going by themselves, by their own servers saying, yep, start the charge from their end. That got it going, albeit very, very slowly. I've got to say this was probably the most annoying charging stop of the trip. It was fairly slow and it just took a bit too much fussing around. Plus, that BMW really didn't help matters. Don't overstay your welcome, people. Even if you are there first, it's just an inconsiderate thing to do. So what's the takeaway here? Well, I've got a few. I mean, in terms of the total cost to do the trip, it's quite affordable, economical even, especially relative to what you might pay for a petrol vehicle. But that's long been the case for EV charging, even as free charging alternatives have somewhat dried up. I guess I did personally benefit from around a 60% slow battery fill at my destination at no cost to me. But it was still considerably cheaper than I could have done it previously in any kind of fuel vehicle. But what about the Tesla Supercharger advantage? Well, look, I'd say that if Tesla had kept its network to itself, and personally I do think that it's an overall plus for Australian EV drivers that it hasn't to an extent, then that title might still be up for grabs. That advantage might still be there, even though it's pretty clear that trips of this length are quite feasible right now. Yeah, there's absolutely a need for more chargers at specific sites and a little more reliability, and charging speed wouldn't go astray either. I mean, I doubt that I'm going to optionally duck into Karuah anytime, and certainly I could have done this trip a little bit faster had I incorporated those open Tesla chargers into my mix. And those new Tesla sites, let's face it, have taken public charging money to be built, so they certainly should be open to all. And obviously there's limitations to my model. This is a sample size of one after all. But certainly for trips like this, where people are having range anxiety or fussing about whether or not they need to buy a specific car to access a network because everything else will not be able to make it, no, I really don't think that that's true anymore along many of these roadways. Certainly not all of them, but absolutely this one can be done for sure. And that's it for my road trip. What do you think? Got an opinion? EVs are something that lots of people have really strong opinions about. Chat to me below, and thanks for watching all the way through to the end, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.